Quests are a powerful tool for video game development. They add depth and immersion to your game, guiding players through their adventure and offering them a rewarding sense of achievement upon completion. Depending on your game, quests can take on many forms and take on a host of different requirements. In today's video, we'll explore how to create a simple quest system that you can expand upon and customize using Godot. Let's go. To start off, I've set up a simple scene here in the style of a top-down RPG, where my character can run around, but I want him to be able to walk up to the merchant and receive a simple quest which requires him to go retrieve an item and return to the merchant to receive a reward in gold and XP. Before we get into it, let me show you a couple of things I set up beforehand so you can understand how the different elements in my game are communicating with one another. In Project Settings, under Auto Load, I've set up a scene for my game manager. Since this is an auto load, it will get loaded into the game independent of the main scene tree and persist between level changes. It can also easily be accessed from every script in my game. Inside the game manager scene, I've set up a canvas layer with some basic labels on it to display the player's XP and gold on the screen. This is all powered by a very basic script that updates the labels in the process function so the values displayed on screen are always current. Since I know this scene will always be loaded, I've also added some basic UI elements for quests here that are hidden by default. This will be used to display quest information to the player as they progress through the quest. Here I have a canvas layer called Quest Box. Inside it is a Sprite 2D I'm using for the background and two rich text labels, one for the quest title and one for the quest description. Your game likely has different UI components in it, so it's up to you how you set this up. I just did this so I'm able to demonstrate how you can update UI elements from within your quests. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, let's get into building our quest system. So the first thing we need to do is define what a quest is. To do that, let's add a script to the scripts folder called Quest Manager. We'll make sure this script extends Node2D and add the class name Quest Manager to it. The Quest Manager will define anything that all quests will require, and any quest types that we define will inherit from it. We can get rid of the ready and process functions here because we don't need them. We know that all of our quests will need to interact with the UI elements that I just showed you, so we'll start by defining them here. Depending on how you've set them up, your paths to the UI elements might be slightly different than what I'm using, so make sure you get these right for your game structure. Next, we'll create an export group for quest settings. This will create a section in the inspector where we can set up our quest settings for each quest, reducing the amount of code we have to write overall, while still allowing us to customize each quest independently. Inside our quest settings, we'll define the name of our quest description, and the text shown to the player once they've reached the quest goal. Next, we'll use an enum to define all the possible statuses for our quest. Using enums is cool because when exported to a variable, we get a drop-down in the inspector where we can choose one of the choices. We'll do that now by defining our quest status variable and setting the default to available. We'll want our player to receive a reward for completing the request, so let's define another export group for our reward settings. Here, we want to set up variables for the total amount of gold the player will receive, as well as the amount of XP they will be rewarded with after finishing the quest. Now, let's create a new script. We'll call this one Quest. While this is a generic tutorial, for your game you might want to create multiple scripts instead to define your different types of quests. For instance, you might have a search quest where the player has to find something, or a kill quest where they have to hunt a certain number of enemies. Let's set up the most basic type of quest here, where the user has to find an object and return it to the merchant. Inside our quest script, the first thing we want to do is make sure it extends the Quest Manager script we just created and give it its own unique class name. In this case, we're just calling it Quest. Again, we can remove the process and ready functions as those aren't necessary for us right now. In this script, we'll define a few methods that other scripts can call to interact with our quest. The first one of these will be Start Quest. Since this script inherits from our Quest Manager, we have access to all the variables we just set up in the Quest Manager. So let's make sure that before the quest starts, it has its status set to available to prevent it from restarting once it's already underway. Then, we'll update the status to started and mark our UI canvas layer as visible while also updating our rich text labels to reflect the title and description of the quest. Next, we want to define a function that can be called when the player has reached the goal. Players can only reach the goal if the quest has already been started, so we'll check to make sure the quest has the right status set. Then, we'll update the status to reflect that the player has reached their goal and change out the description text in the UI so the player has instructions on where to go next to complete the quest and receive their reward. Finally, we'll define a function that can be called when the player finishes the quest. We'll first make sure they already reached the goal, then we'll update the quest status to finished. We need to hide the quest UI now so it doesn't remain visible on the screen, and then reward our player with gold and XP. Now we can go back to our merchant, who is set up with just a sprite 2D and a collision shape 2D at the moment. Because we used class name in our quest class, we can add a quest node directly to the merchant. Let's rename it to Gemstone Quest. Heading over to the inspector, we'll see inputs for the options we defined in our quest manager available here. We can give our quest a title. I'll use Find a Gemstone. For the quest description, we'll put Search the kingdom to find the gemstone. Then, after the player has reached the goal, we want to give them instructions on what to do next. We'll put Return to the merchant with the gemstone. We'll leave the quest status set to available and head over to the reward settings. For completing this quest, we'll reward the player with 500 gold and 1000 XP. Now that our quest is set up, we need to implement it into our scene. Let's start by adding a script to our merchant and saving it into our scripts folder. Here, we'll set up the body entered signal to detect when a body crosses into the collision shape on the merchant. Since my player is in a global group called player, I can check here to make sure the signal is only recognized when the player is the body crossing into the collision shape. Now, we'll make sure that the quest status is set to available and, if so, call the start quest method on the quest. Since the player will need to return to the merchant, we can add a second conditional here that calls the finish quest method once the goal has been reached and the player has returned to the merchant. Finally, we need to define our quest variable at the top. Because we're using export again, we'll be able to drag the quest node in directly in the inspector and allow our merchant to potentially offer different types of quests at different points in the game by switching out which quest node is being used. Then, let's just remove the ready and process functions again to keep things nice and clean. Now we need to create our gemstone. Go up top and click the plus icon to add a new scene. Choose Other Node and select Area 2D. We can name the scene Gemstone. I'll drag a sprite of an amethyst in here so we can see the gemstone. Then add a collision shape 2D node, select Circle as the shape, and position the collision shape around the sprite. We'll go ahead and save the scene. Now we'll add a script to our gemstone and save it in the scripts folder of the project. Our gemstone needs to know what quest it's part of, so we'll define a quest variable at the top like we did for the merchant. We'll once again add a signal for body entered so we can detect when the player collides with the collision shape in our gemstone. We'll make sure the colliding body is the player, then, if so, we'll call the reached goal function on the quest to update the status. Finally, we can call queueFree on the gemstone to remove it from the scene and clean up those ready and process functions as well. Now, we'll need the gemstone to spawn once the quest is started, so let's head over to our merchant and add a marker 2D node to define the gem spawn point. We'll rename it to Gem Spawn Point and drag it into place in our scene. Now, in our merchant script, we need to define the scene for the gemstone. Once our quest has been started, we can instantiate an instance of the gemstone in the scene and add it as a child to the merchant node. We can set the position to the position of the gem spawn point marker, then set the quest property on the gem to be the same quest that is assigned to our merchant. Finally, let's drag the gemstone quest node into the available spot in the inspector on our merchant node to tell the merchant which quest we want him to present to the player. We'll also reposition the spawn point a little closer to him so we can see when it spawns. Now, if we play our scene, we can see that when we approach the merchant, he assigns us a quest right away to find the gemstone. Our gemstone spawns when the quest is started as well. When we retrieve the gemstone, it's removed from the scene and the text in our UI updates with instructions to return to the merchant. When we return to the merchant, the UI is hidden and the player receives the reward in gold and XP. If you're using an add-on like Dialogic for dialogue, you could call that here to have the merchant congratulate the player and potentially trigger a new quest you've set up for them to complete. I hope this video helped spur some ideas for you on how you can implement a quest system into your games in Godot. Let me know in the comments if you figured out any clever ways to expand on this concept. That's all I've got for today, guys, and thanks so much for watching.